For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bronwyn, but you might know me as the other Bronwyn. Louise very kindly calls me B2, so that also works as well. And it's certainly my privilege to introduce our final speaker, Louise, today. She obviously doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to tell you anyway, especially in case over these last couple of days you've begun to think, is she really as good as everyone seems to say she is? Well, of course she is. Let me tell you a little bit of the solid facts. So Louise has been a sports dietitian for 40 years, including 30 years at the AIS as the head of nutrition. As we learnt in her honorary lecture, she went to the Olympic Games first in 1996 to Atlanta. She has published over 350 papers, 350. Probably nobody in this room has a good quality sports nutrition textbook that Louise hasn't written or co-written or edited. If that wasn't enough, she has an Order of Australia medal, which she got in 2009, and that was for her contribution to sports nutrition specifically. So, yeah, she's certainly not overrated. To top that all off, she's actually an incredibly kind and generous human, and I hope you guys have had a chance to experience that over the last couple of days. And without further ado, I'll hand over to LB to close us off.
Thank you, B2. I'm really disappointed you didn't tell those little facts about me that people don't know, because I was going to tell you that I had lunch one day with Anthony Edwards from Top Gun. So I have a degree of separation of one from George Clooney, and I'm hoping to close the gap. No. Thank you so much for still being here. Thank you so much to SDA for being SDA and for putting on wonderful conferences. And thank you so much for the honour yesterday, and particularly thank Ben and Greg for the the wonderfulness of our friendship and the time and effort they put into that presentation. It's just incredible. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're visiting, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and acknowledge that sport for me has been really important in my very meagre cultural journey. And it started 30 years ago, attending a St Kilda Collingwood match where Nicky Winmar finally had enough of the racist taunts, and he pulled up his jumper and he told everybody he was proud to be Indigenous. And more recently, the Female Athlete Research Camp, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And I'd like to dedicate this lecture to AIS Sports Nutrition. And I'm going to get teary because all those awards, they are only because of AIS Sports Nutrition. I just get to be the one that stands up and gets given all the accolades, but really these people deserve all the respect and the love and the generosity that you've got to give. And I put that in the word cloud. It's interesting, the ones that stood out, I didn't engineer that, so there you go. I started off too trying to get some insights on how to do things for the future, so I asked ChatGPT, how was I going to give an awesome lecture on the future of sports nutrition? And within a nanosecond, it started telling me all the things that I should cover, and it even started to tell me how I should cover it. I had to be entertaining and case studies and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, too bossy. So I've taken liberty of wriggling around a little bit because I don't know the future of sports nutrition, but I think I know some questions that might help us to get some answers. And what I'm going to do is go through them with you today, and in some cases where we've got a bit of a chance to interrogate them, have a little bit of a look at some of the answers and divide them into the good, the bad and the ugly. Now, one of the franchises that I think does future really well is the Marvel Group, and every time they come out with a new Marvel movie, they always make sure it's got a backstory that connects it to the origin. So I think we should do that and say, where did we come from? You know, what is sports nutrition? And if I think what's happened over my career, and we had a good laugh at that the other day, when I started in sports nutrition in 1980, it didn't really exist. There were about 12 or 13 publications a year that would have been classified as sports nutrition. And as I'm now in the twilight of my career, we're now getting that number of papers a day. So there's now 30,000 pieces of evidence that sports nutrition is really a science, and we're contributing to it. So we should be really proud that it's now something that other people see too. But think about not just the quantity of what we were doing back in 1980, but the quality aspects of it. And think of the ways in which we were employed and the way that we saw our athletes and the way that we gave them information. I used to have some shelves, and I used to collect supplements. Anyone that I saw I'd have, and it used to be able to fit in shelves. If you have a look at what's sports nutrition and similar sort of characteristics into 2023, it's just so vastly different, isn't it? The way that we're employed, the way that we've got to work with things and new opportunities, and the way that we can deliver education and interact with athletes. So what are the questions that might direct what the future will look like for us? And obviously, some of the things that we've heard about at the conference have led us to think about, can the devices and wearables that athletes now have access to help us make better sports nutrition practice? And we now know that modern athletes are just full of gadgets. And there are the ones that sort of are validated, and we've heard Shona talk about them so nicely today, and Amy as well. And there's a lot of way that we can collect information about our athletes. And the questions that we need to think about if we're looking at something new that comes on the market is the information that it's producing valid and reliable? We've heard that very eloquently from Shona. Who gets to interpret the information? So is it the athlete or you or somebody else? Can that information be used in real time, or is it something that we collect and then reflect on and then do something differently next time? And is the investment worth it? How much does it cost us in time and effort? And is this the limiting factor that it's addressing? Because you can get caught up in so many things and it's not really adding the value. But in terms of the different kinds of things, we can think about the good, bad, the ugly. And in terms of the good, we can maybe think about the CGMs. And we've heard that they're now being moved out of work with diabetes into the sports nutrition space. And the good thing that they might be able to do is tell us a little bit more about fueling and how athletes might adjust that, particularly during exercise, to perform better. And it's been taken up certainly by cycling, and you can see the way that cycling has suggested it could be used. Information could be relayed back to the team car and help the athlete change the way they're fueling during a race. And we've also heard that it might be a way of looking for first signs of low energy availability, adaptations of various body systems. If you want to know more about it and you didn't get to the terrific pre-conference workshop that was led by Greg and Amy Lee Bowler, then I point you in the direction of the review paper that they've written, and you'll probably find there that even though this stuff sounds really good, I think we're a bit premature in saying this is terrific and we can make use of all the information in a way that really will transform practice. And before we even get there, some people have told us that they're bad. So cycling's actually banned the use of CGMs during races. And we've heard that in some cases information can lead people to get anxious, and we certainly worry about the glucorexia that people might get by just getting too much information about what's happening with blood glucose. But in the case of UCI, the reason that they've banned it, and Mick Rogers, Australian cyclist, who's now working for UCI as their technical wizard, he says the reason that they've banned it is that they don't want cycling becoming too formulaic like F1. They don't want athletes knowing exactly what to put into themselves. They want to see bonking. They want to see these exciting things in cycling. Otherwise, it's going to lose its appeal. But also they recognise that if you give an athlete too much information, you might stop them from actually interacting with an educator or a dietitian and getting a larger range of information, because they're getting just one thing and thinking that stands in the way of better variety of information. So that's interesting. But let's think about the ugly when it comes to tech devices and wearables. And the example I can give here is muscle sound. So in about 2015, we started hearing about a company that was using ultrasound to be able to give real-time information on muscle glycogen content of athletes. And they were doing it based on the use of ultrasound, where they could get the trace and see the differences in the echogenicity, the darkness of the muscle, reflected body water or muscle water, which they could equate to glycogen, and they could give non-invasive investment or assessment of muscle glycogen. And it was going to be the whole new thing that allowed athletes to know how to fuel without putting holes in them. And it sounded terrific. You can see that this is some of the early information that was written up in the grey literature about how wonderful it was going to be, how it was developed, how it was validated by the people that owned the patent for it, and it was taken up by a lot of companies. So we had lots of sporting companies, professional teams using it at the side of the pitch or in the change rooms to tell athletes what their glycogen levels are. And it was going gangbusters, apparently. Now, we thought, how good is this? Wouldn't it be terrific if we could know muscle glycogen levels of athletes? And at the time, we were just about to start doing a study in the PhD of Kristen Tomsic, where we were looking at whether creatine loading could affect carbohydrate loading. And we thought, well, if this whole thing is geared to measuring muscle water and equating that to glycogen, what happens if you put another solute into the muscle that also might attract water that isn't glycogen? Would it interfere with the readings? And he was doing it in terms of performance outcomes, but Julia was using it as part of her PhD on the reliability and validity of DEXA, which also has an essential component being the water content of the body in the muscle. And so she was going to piggyback on the study and to see whether these changes in muscle glycogen, muscle creatine affected DEXA readings. And we thought, well, why don't we do the muscle sound at the same time? So we met up with the muscle sound people. We wanted to be independent, so we flew them over to Canberra, got them to show us how it worked. We ended up having to borrow their unit and signed a contract that we would give the thing back and that we'd also give them access to the data to improve their algorithm. Cut to the chase. Here's the glycogen data, mean and individuals from the different parts of the study where we've depleted people by exercise, put it back in normally and then carbo loaded them, either with or without the creatine loading. And this is derived from the biopsies. And this is what Muscle Sound found. Nada. And we gave them a second chance to do it again. They had a new improved algorithm. And still nada. So we wrote it up, saying that, well, being kind, saying that the use of it was equivocal. I'll point out the publication dates of the different outputs from that study. First, all done at the same time, remember. We were able to publish straight away with our performance data and the DEXA data. Unfortunately, when Julia went to her first experience of an overseas conference, taking her poster to ACSM, she had to put it in the bin because we received a letter from the lawyers saying that if we showed the abstract at the conference, we'd be sued. And so it took us a long time and a lot of bravery and a lot of interaction with other people who were also publishing several things before we got to that point. These days, if you look up muscle sound, you find that it doesn't even talk about athletic performance. They've now moved into another thing, healthcare, and they're now using the ultrasound to look at muscle health and muscle quality and whatever in terms of patients in hospitals. But they're also including muscle glycogen as one of the aspects of looking at muscle. So there is some difficulty, I think, in accepting that every piece of technology is going to be used well. All right, question 3. What about food technology, not just gadget technology? Can that be part of helping us be better practitioners? And we've got athletes who have got a goal. And we've got a whole lot of sports nutrition guidelines with which we have a lot of confidence in the underpinning science. Unfortunately, in real life, there's a whole lot of hurdles that stand in the way of athletes achieving those goals in terms of nutrient intake. And so we've got special foods that can help us. And when I'm talking about these special foods, I'm going to include the sports foods, which are particularly manufactured for the athlete in order to achieve those goals. And we've seen some lovely examples amongst the exhibitors. Thank you for supporting SDA. But I'm also going to include the use of processed foods and ultra-processed foods by athletes because they're everyday consumers of these foods, but they might also use them for a sports-specific purpose. So let's think about the good. So one of the good things about processed foods is that they tell you what's in them. Mother Nature didn't put labels on stuff, but when you're helping athletes to know what they need to eat to achieve a nutrient target, food labels can be very useful. And in some cases, the specialised sports foods manufacture nice portion sizes of these foods, so it delivers on the kinds of amounts of these nutrient targets that we set them. Sometimes our foods contain more than one nutrient so that we can combine some different nutritional goals. And sometimes it's just about the consistency of the composition. When we all started wanting to have athletes increase their nitrate or supplement with nitrate, you know, if you went to the supermarket and bought beets and you had the whole problem of cooking them and making them edible, you'd also have the differing nitrate content. But now we've got large vats where it's all homogenised and concentrated so that we can be sure of the concentration. And sometimes it's not about getting an effective serve or enough of it. Sometimes it's about not getting too much of it. And we can thank Ben for his work in showing us that the variability of the caffeine content of our common serves of coffee can mean that we could overdo it. And so we've now got ways in which we can use sports foods to get the smallest minimal effective dose, and that's really helpful. These are all things that you all know, so I'm going to whiz through this because it's, you know, teaching, but I want to just point out how useful these foods are. So sometimes it's about improving the athlete's food environment, things that allow them to take food with them with minimal storage or preparation requirements over a busy day, overseas or during exercise itself. You can always find some things that are safe and, you know, confident you can eat them wherever you go. And sometimes, you know, you can take a few things with you if you're a fussy eater or someone that can't eat some things, so that you can turn any food occasion into something that you can rescue into what you need. We can also help the athlete to actually get to the point of swallowing the food, or at least putting it in their mouth, by the way that we process things. So we can concentrate things into a smaller volume. So you can get your protein serve in a much smaller amount with the specialised sports foods or fortified dairy. And that's really important for athletes that have to eat bucket loads of things. You know, it doesn't sound like you could ever not love eating, but sometimes athletes get to the point where it's just too much, don't they, guys? And sometimes, you know, you can make things just taste so good. You know, some of the processing, you think about the ultra-processed foods, we're told that they're hyper-palatable, that's a bad thing, but sometimes it's a great thing because you want people to enjoy it and actually feel like they want to have it. And sometimes these foods are actually specially flavour changed so that they appeal to people who are exercising. Or we come out with lots of different flavours so that if you're going to have them for 3 weeks, you've got no flavour fatigue problems with all the variety that you can have. Sometimes it's about they're just easier to handle when you're during exercise. Yes, you could eat everyday food, but isn't it much simpler to have something that's purpose-built for that? And not only have you got to put it in your mouth, but we've got to think about digesting it and absorbing it and getting it to the muscle. And we've got these specialised foods now which either aim to assist with gastric emptying or assist with intestinal uptake to make it easier to get larger amounts to the muscle, and do it in such a way that we don't lose them. And that's upsetting for the crowd, it's upsetting for the athlete because they're losing some of their nutrition and they're not absorbing it. And yes, it does come out both ends. And then we've got the safety aspect. If you're doing a very dirty, muddy sport, it's so much easier to make sure that you don't eat all that mud by having something that's packaged in a really convenient way. Sometimes it's about just the food hygiene aspects of travel and being able to be certain that your packaged food is going to have a much lower risk of causing food poisoning. Sometimes we need to think about everyday foods being a source of contaminants that may lead to an anti-doping violation. And we know that some of our sports supplements have a problem with the undeclared agents that are banned in sport. And we have to think about whether that applies across to some of the special fortified foods now. And we've had some lovely work done, sponsored by the AIS, looking at these protein fortified foods to see if they contribute a doping risk, and we've been able to see that they're very low in risk. And what is risky in terms of what might be in the food supply is more these bespoke things where you get someone putting protein powder in their protein balls or your coffee. Now, every one of those attributes of those foods, though, can be turned against them. And we've got to remember that it's the way that we use these processed foods. And so some of the things that we need to think about in terms of the bad side of them is that they may change some of the nutritional composition or characteristics of whole foods in a way that we don't want. And so remember that most of these things are targeted on macronutrients and may not consider the micronutrient content and some of the other food chemicals that we now are identifying. Sometimes removing the food matrix may be taking away one of the most important parts of the food. Sometimes because these things are fortified, we may end up with people having large amounts of things that they don't realise because they haven't added up all the things that they're having. And we often get these situations where athletes are having very unbalanced diets because of their reliance on these foods. The ultra-processed food story, I think, is a very real one. It's now being blamed for a lot of the problems that are associated with poor eating in the community, and it's not any particular diet, it's something about the processing of the food that's causing the problems. And it's a stark reminder that, you know, we're needing to know more about what's in these foods, not to remove them from the diet, but to try and find out what is the problem so that we might make better versions of them. The cost, obviously processing adds to the cost, particularly in the case of these very niche foods like sports foods, but it's not just the cost to you as a consumer, it's the cost to the wider planet. And we now know that the ultra-processed foods do contribute a large amount to the carbon footprint of our planet, and not just in terms of the packaging that goes into the carbon footprint, but the mess we make when we're using them. And we see it in these large events. But even if you go onto trails these days, you know, this is someone's taken a photo of what they found on their nature trail out running one morning. So what can we do about this? Because there's obviously, you don't want to get rid of the good because there's some bad. We've got to be able to work in the real world and help athletes navigate things. And so what I try and talk to athletes about is using them properly. And don't be like Mike unless you're Mike or doing what Mike's doing. There's got to distinguish between the food itself and the context in which you're having it. It's really important that, particularly with the sports foods and supplements, that we encourage athletes to use batch tested, and thank you to HASTA for supporting the conference and the work that you do. We want to make sure that athletes think about trying to only use these ultra-processed foods when there's not a whole food alternative, so they get the best of every world. I love the fact that the AIS supplement program now, even with sports foods which have validated uses, there's always a reminder to the athlete to go back to a food source if that's a possibility. Good job, Gaz. So I guess the bottom line is that we can all lift our game with the way that we're doing it, and we can do it for our own use, but we can find ways of being able to do it for the planet as well. Now, I'm going to talk about the ugly, and this is really serious, and I had to go to a main source for this. This is from Burke GPT. Used to be called my soapbox, but it's been updated. This is my belief. My main problem with ultra-processed foods is that I think that they've been the main contributor, or a main contributor, to one of the problems that we've got at the moment, with all these just fights about food, people misunderstanding what diets are about, and distrusting nutrition science and us in particular. And I believe that there's a life cycle for every diet that comes up, and I've been around for 40 years, as you've heard, so I've seen some of the same things cycle more than once. What happens with any of the diets is there's the first stage, the falling in love stage. And generally, when a new diet appears, it's got a plausible theory about why it's the best thing since sliced bread, and all those diets have got some characteristics that are fairly much the same. They have lots of differences, but they all generally talk about getting enough proteins, spreading it across the day, eating vegetables and enjoying slowly so that you don't overeat. So that's sort of a commonality of all those diets. And people take it up and they love it because it works. And when I say it works, it's mostly to do with weight control. But what most of those diets do is that they just take away food availability. They reduce the number of foods that you can possibly eat. All those diets do the same thing, so they reduce calorie intake, and so the main outcome is that people lose weight and they're happy. Then what happens is we reach this tipping point, this saturation point, and it seems not to be working so much, and then we're over it, and it's gone, and then 10 years down the track it'll reappear in a new version. So I want to just look at this bit of it. What's happening here to stop these diets being the best thing out and working for everybody? And I think the problem is that once you start getting a lot of people following it, you've now got a commercial opportunity for the food industry. And what they do is produce special foods that are able to be eaten on this diet, and they're ultra-processed. So they don't have the good characteristics of at least the nutritional side of things. And I've actually got an index for this to when it appears, and that's the ice cream index. When you can go to the supermarket and you look in there and there's 6 different keto or paleo or whatever it is ice creams, then you know you're about to hit that tipping point. Because now food's available. And when you've got all those things back in your diet, you can still overeat, and so the diet stops working. And then we move on. If you don't believe me, I'll give you some case histories. So let's look at the paleo diet. When it first started, it was all about whole foods that cave people eat. And it gave you a list of these very wholesome, nutrient-dense foods. Now, you can buy paleo everything. Paleo chocolate, paleo ice cream, paleo beer, paleo everything. I can tell you the only cavemen that ever ate that are these blokes. And it's with everything. So we've got the keto diet, how it started, how we've used it, whole foods, and now it's all about fat bombs and things that you can make with contrived ingredients that still taste sweet. And there's even promoting the fact that you can be on a dirty keto diet, so if you're lazy and you want to eat unwholesome food, there's a keto version of it. And we're proud of it. This one makes me really sad, and I'm sure it does to Greg. So we've got an interest now in vegetarian eating, and it's really being driven by these faux meats, faux dairy products. And this really made me feel sad. I'm not sure if Greg's seen this. This is a study that came out of France where we've done a large population survey where they get people to write down what they're eating. And in this particular survey recently, they had a look to see the difference in the diet quality of people according to various different dietary philosophies. And so we've divided them into meat eaters and then the various versions of fewer choices from meat eating going right through to vegans. And the further into the vegetarian vegan eating you go, the more likely it is that you're using ultra-processed foods. And that's particularly if you're young and particularly a recent adopter of the vegan lifestyle. And that's really sad. And this one just blows me away. So now we've got diets that tell us when to eat and to reduce the window of eating, which is all really good for certain things. But now we've got processed foods that you can eat when you're not eating. It's just crazy, isn't it? So Burke GPT says, I don't care what dietary religion you want to be, just be your best self. All right, and I'll finish off this section by remembering that it's not just ultra-processing that's creating our non-sustainable living with our planet, and we should give some credit to Nana Meyer and some of her colleagues that have been reminding us for a long time now of all the different things that we can do with local eating, with increasing the plant rather than animal protein in our diet, and the way that we're using processed foods is contributing to a more sustainable lifestyle. So thank you, Nana. All right, we're moving on to number 4. And will we get more being able to personalise and individualise our nutrition strategies, which are part of our sports nutrition philosophies, through understanding more about the genomics and the epigenomics of people? And we've got companies that are out there doing testing, telling us things and telling people what they should be eating based on their genetics. In sports nutrition, this is now creeping into our world. We've got people who are taking snips of some of the genes involved with caffeine metabolism or reactivity and telling people that they're either slow metabolisers or more likely to respond to caffeine. And this is all really interesting information, but all these studies find different outcomes. And I think at this stage it's far too early in the story to be able to be guiding our dietary patterns simply based on this sort of information. Down the line, there may be more credibility or more substantiation, but I think this is an interesting space that we need to watch, but perhaps too soon to act on. The other thing we should think about is where our processes have been and where our focuses have been over the last 60 years of sports nutrition, and are we looking too much in the one space? And if you have a look at all the technologies that have been able to be evolving over these last nearly decade, century, you can see most of these things have been focused on what the muscle's doing and what it's either adapting to or what it's burning, because we're really interested in trying to make the muscle produce ATP to translate into work or power or something that underpins performance. And if you have a look at, I love this cartoon, because it's just looking at the athlete on the slide, just looking at their muscles, and the head's off the top. It's not even thinking about that being an important thing to have a look at. And so I'm thinking what we should be paying more thought to, or directing some of our research and practice questions, is to other parts that contribute to performance. And we now know that the brain can do so much, and we don't even have to consume and swallow the food for the brain to feel part of the story and to react. And so we've now got a whole range of these nutrients and food chemicals that have some kind of a sensing interaction with the brain to make us feel different and to drive the way that we exercise differently. And we, I think, have undersold how much the placebo effect of what we're doing is making a difference to athletes' confidence in the way that they take our information or the way that it makes them perform. And we should be looking more into how we can maximise that effect. Bron will be really pleased that I've remembered that we now know more about those trillions of people that go along our journey with us in various parts of our body, and understanding that there's all these interactions that we don't know about yet that may be part of how we adapt to exercise and how we perform. And that even if we're still interested in the muscle, we need to think of it as more than just something that contracts and produces work. It produces chemicals that talks to the rest of the body, these myokines and exokines, these proteins that go around to various other organs, sometimes in response to exercise, and make other parts of our bodies get a message. So we need to think about the muscle as being more than just the thing that gets us moving. So I've talked a little bit about all these new things that we need to research, but how are we going to do it? What's the future? We've got to think about who's going to fund us. And there's a lot of different ways in which we can be researchers and paid for our efforts and paid for the activities that we're doing. These are the traditional things, and we note that Australia has not a very good track record in how much we value research and fund it. And in the case of sports nutrition, which tends to be thought of as sort of frivolous rather than needing a lot of government support, industry grants are one of the best ways, or one of the most popular ways in which we get the ability to do some of our work. And there's the good, the bad and the ugly there. Here's the good thing. I mean, the good thing is you've got to do the research, but there are some data that suggests that people who do take industry grants actually benefit from not just that project, but the contribution of it to their research outputs. And this is a nice little paper that was in Nature recently showing that those people who do industry research tend to have a really good track record in other areas of research and their outputs. So that's a good reason for doing it. But then there's the bad side of things, the perception or the reality that being involved with industry-funded research changes what you're researching, or the way that research is done, or the way that research is communicated. And we have to be really aware of that as not just a reality, but a perception that might go across all the work that we do. And then there's the ugly side of it. And ugly is when it happens to you. So in about 2014, I was invited to be part of some kind of a DA professional development activity, and I was asked to contribute a lecture on caffeine to a whole range of things that DA was providing to its members. So I did it, and I got paid $800 or something. A couple of years later, I turned up on the front page of The Age as being one of the people that had taken money from Coca-Cola, because the project was a DA activity, but it was sponsored by Coke. And so you can get yourself into trouble even when you don't think you're getting yourself into trouble, and that's not a nice thing to wake up to for breakfast, especially when I got $800 and they gave away a lot more money to other people. So I'm thinking maybe the future is we need to have a better way of funding the kind of work that we do. And here's a model that I want to propose, that we've got industry and we want to get money from them. And we should get money from them because a lot of industries are making money from being involved in sport and exercise because of the gadgets or the products or the services that they're selling that are around our industry. And so we could use a range of different sticks to say, well, if you're going to make a claim about something, or you're going to be involved in an industry where you're benefiting from some sort of a nutrition and exercise contribution, then you should be funding this new granting body that I've invented. And there may be some ways in which we force people to do it, but there may be some ways in which we can give industry some carrots, some incentives to do it. So maybe there's a tax benefit for doing it. Maybe the fact that they're part of this might create this halo effect because it's going to be really successful. And that maybe being part of it means that you get access to some early research. But the important part of it is this granting body is going to have a wall between industry and the research. So industry just put in their money and then that's it. And then there'll be a board of management, and the board of management can decide what are the priorities, what are the rounds of grants that are going to be announced, who's going to be awarded the money, and they can report back to the industry about what's been found, using ways in which we can control the narrative. And then the scientists can be way, way over, and they just get to do the good work. And so they're not tainted by any of the other processes. So this is my invention, and when they make me Queen of the World, this will be number one on the... Things are going to be different round here, let me tell you. But we don't need to think about who's funding it, but who's doing it. And there's lots of people that contribute to the information that we use in practice, or the information that we might be generating ourselves. And just to sort of give you differences of the kinds of people that contribute, I thought we could look at some of the species in our environment, and we can first look at the John Hawley species. And he's a traditional exercise nutrition researcher. And so he has a very academic orientation to the research that he does in nutrition and exercise. And you can see the characteristics of his work, in that, you know, this is what he is up against, this is what he fears, this is what he's aiming for, and this is his biggest challenge. And I'm going to completely contrast him with me, who's been a hobbyist researcher for most of my career, only recently dipping my toes into academia. And so I've done research, but in a completely different way, completely different goals, sometimes different outputs, different enemies, different challenges. I went to a conference last week where I sat next to the guy that discovered mTOR, and he got up and he gave a talk. I lost it after the first sentence, but he showed us all the clever stuff he was doing. And I thought, that's really impressive. But nothing that you do is as hard as what I have to do, and that is measure performance and be able to see if something I do can change that in a way that's meaningful for an athlete. That's the hardest thing you'll ever, ever do. Underappreciated. And the other thing we need to think about is that there's other people that are contributing to sports science, sports nutrition knowledge, and sometimes it's the athletes themselves. And sometimes our job's to just validate what they've already found out. And here's an example of this that will be close to the heart of Ben and Greg. This is why I put it in. So this is taken from one of the Olympic Games that I went to. We're 2/3 into the road race, and we're at the feed zone, and all the soigneurs, and they're all doing it, not just us. They've thrown away the Gatorade or the Powerade, and they're now handing out bottles, and because this one's, you can see through it, you can see that it's some sort of brown, sticky liquid. It's Coca-Cola. That's not new in sport. Frank Shorter used Coke as his sports drink when he won the marathon Olympic gold medal in 1972, but that was before Gatorade was around, so he had an excuse. Why are we, centuries or decades later, throwing away something that's got hundreds of papers saying that it works and it's been perfected for sport just because of the marketing of Coke? Doesn't make sense. We thought, athletes, you are crazy, because we know how to use caffeine. You have to have 6 milligrams per kg dose 1 hour before you do exercise, because it's got to rise in the bloodstream, increase free fatty acids, spare glycogen, and we've proven this. So you guys are crazy. You're having such a small amount of caffeine at totally the wrong time. Just step aside and let us sort you out. So we did the research. This was done with Ben and Greg. And the first study that we did, we had a cycling situation with a steady state where we could look at metabolism, and then we had a time trial at the end to measure performance. And we did it 4 times, and we had different combinations of these capsules going in. So eventually we had the situation where we had the 6 milligram 1 hour before exercise protocol. We had that same dose but spread during exercise. We had a Coke trial where we had the sports drink replaced just before the time trial with Coke, and then we had our placebo. What did we find? Well, scientists knew 3% improvement in performance when you do it the right way. But also when you do it other ways, including just having the Coke towards the end. And I showed this to Lawrence Spreet, and he said, no, you've got a placebo effect here, because they know they got the cola drink. So we went and did it again. This time, everybody drank sports drink, and then we got a cola-flavoured beverage for that last little bit, and we played around with how much caffeine was in it and how much carb was in it, because we also recognise that Coke has got a higher carbohydrate content than sports drinks. What do we find? It's the real thing, that adding a little bit more sugar and having a small amount of caffeine at the right time of exercise when you're starting to feel fatigued improves your performance. So what we did was just simply validate something that athletes had worked out for themselves. And of course we now know that. We had to write a book about it to show that there's so many different ways of using caffeine. And as consumers, we knew, like, you didn't have your cup of coffee this morning and get your 6 milligrams and stop then, did you? You know how to trickle it in the day to be effective in what you're doing. Can we do sports nutrition research better? I think we can, and one of the things that's been a privilege to be able to do over the last decade of my research career is work more with these training camps in which we embed a research project. And the great thing about it is it's got something for everybody. The athletes always improve their performances after one of our research camps because they're training hard, they're pushing each other, they've got better facilities, they're interacting with sports science and learning things. We've also, with some of our research projects, invited some younger athletes in, and they get to see what it's like to be a big dog. They learn some of the things, but we also put into their brain that when you're an athlete, you should be a research participant. And so we're future-proofing the research community for some of you young people. We've been able to bring in money to sport from different sources or support things that didn't have otherwise funded opportunities. And we've been able to learn new techniques or bring in new equipment for some of the research that we've done. We've had lots of young scientists come and be part of it and upskill them and upskill people in the high-performance sport. We've produced some papers that people are interested in because we're working with elite athletes or high-performance athletes, and that's not often something that people get to see, and so they're interested in their outputs. And we've answered lots of questions, both directly about performance but also some other things. And I'm going to give you a case study Oh no, not supernova. Will she ever shut up about that? But I really do want to explain to you just what these things do. So how did it come about? Well, suddenly in 2013, everyone's keto again. And we knew 30 years ago that the study was done which showed that yes, you could adapt an already trained athlete to be able to double, even triple their capacity to burn fat as a fuel during exercise. And that was okay if you were doing moderate intensity exercise, but once you started doing high intensity, it seemed to become a problem. But when everyone's talking about it again, you have to say to yourself, did we miss something? We've really got to think about whether there's something that we might be able to mine that enhances performance. The other thing that was going on at the same time was that our sports system had changed. The funding model had changed. The AIS was no longer having its own athletic programs. And one of the casualties of that funding change was the athletics program at the AIS, which had produced all the gold medals in race walking. And we had Jarrett talent being able to be supported in one era, suddenly not having a coach, not having a training squad, moving interstate and really struggling to get himself back into Rio shape. So with Jarrett's help, we used money from ACU to be able to fund a training camp and bring in a lot of his international as well as local colleagues for a period of time to improve their training, but also to embed this question about, does the keto diet work? And so we came up with a way of being able to look at it. We came up with ways in which we could allocate athletes to the treatments that they thought might work, so they really rooted for their dietary intervention. And we found ways in which we could really measure performance. We had real-life races with PBs and drug testing and prize money, and so they really wanted to do their best. And what we got out of it was a real performance result in which we were able to show that the keto diet, even though that it improved your ability to burn fat remarkably in these athletes, it caused a detriment to their race performance. And we found out why we think that occurs. We've worked out, just by luck really, because we looked at metabolism, that the cost of producing ATP from fat is more expensive in terms of oxygen. So it's not the substrate that's limiting, it's the oxygen that turns it into ATP aerobically that becomes the limiting factor. And it doesn't matter how long you adapt to it, we're talking basic biochemistry here, so it's not something you could change. And the reason that this was really good timing was that in the world of athletics, we had the era of the super shoe just starting. And these shoes are known to improve economy, that is, improve the speed for a lower oxygen cost by about 4%. And it's changed sport. We've now had every world record from 5,000 metres up to 100 miles broken as a result of these shoes. The keto diet impairs economy, increases the oxygen cost by the same amount. So we've got a really lucky, juxtaposition of diet with something that athletes explain in terms of giving them the bottom line. And the other thing that was really interesting is that I got introduced to citizen sports science. When we did Supernova 2, our question was, well, what happens if you've been on a keto diet but then gone back to carbohydrate and tapered and raced? A bit like, doing altitude training where you know that it doesn't help you at the time, but you're adapting your body to leave some kind of a legacy that might mean that you can perform better down the track. So how do we think of that? Well, it was because our athletes, even though we've told the ethics committee that they're all anonymised, they're all famous athletes and they're out there blogging and tweeting and telling everybody what they're doing, and all their race results are available in the public domain. And so suddenly we can see people like Evan Dunphy finishing Supernova, going back to his high-carb diet and then smashing the Canadian record. And so we get people on Twitter starting to tell us, well, this is what keto does. It's about periodising it into the whole program. Of course, I did mention that we have a training effect with our research camps, and a lot of the athletes that have been on the high-carb diet also smashed records after they'd finished with the camp. But it gave us the whole next roll-on of what we could look at. And so Supernova's been remarkably successful. We're up to Supernova 8. And we've had a whole lot of different things that we've looked at because athletes are interested in different things. We've had a chance to pursue things in terms of performance, but we've also been able to get really credibility for this work. We've got, being able to publish in some good journals and getting good impact factors as well as altmetrics, people talking about it. And we've been able to look not just at performance and metabolism, but a whole range of things. Just with the keto studies, there have been a whole range of other outputs. So it's really research that's quite remarkable in terms of its productivity. But I want to tell you about the best part, and I call this the serendipitous outputs from these research projects, because they're the fun part, they're the stories. They're the things that you don't expect, but when you put a whole lot of special people together and have fun, just stuff happens. So one of the things that happened is we've now got a really, really incredibly fun family of international race walkers that are part of the Supernova family. And they've all had performance breakthroughs and they all love Supernova and they love each other because of the fun and the benefits of being involved in our research. There's Evan, he's just won the Commonwealth Games medal. And there's Declan, who's the second medal, the silver medalist, he's Australian, and they're doing the Supernova salute. And that's because Jared Tallant's missing a finger, because when he was a little baby, he put his finger in a thing that shouldn't have and lost it. And so all our athletes meet around the world, and they send me the Supernova salute pictures from wherever they've been. How great's that? And it's made a difference to Australian sport. Now, this was an unexpected letter I received last week, or actually it got sent to ACU. I didn't ask for this, but it just turned up at ACU and they sent it on to me. This is Brent Valance, the coach, saying to ACU that he wants to go on record as stating that the Supernova franchise has single-handedly been able to rescue an entire event on the program of Athletics for Australia. Isn't that amazing? That's just incredible. And we've had some terrific people come through. Alana McKay is an honours student when she started, and now she's a gun postdoc. She's absolutely terrific, and I've been able to see her recognise that and keep it for myself. And we've got one of the athletes doing an honours project too. So there's just these remarkable things that happen from these outputs. Can we do it better though? Well, one of the things we need to do is make sure that we remember females, and it's been really problematic that so much of our research has not been done on females. And when I first saw these kinds of headlines, I thought the thing was that there wasn't enough female researchers. And then I started reading, oh, it's the participants. And I thought about it, I thought, well, maybe I should look and see what I've done. This is in 2018 that I examined my soul. And at this stage, I looked at the publications that I had produced that were just about performance. And I looked to see how many times have I included females in some way, either as part of a cohort or specifically looking at females and their ability to respond to an intervention. And that was the very sad outcome. And so I realised that I'm part of the problem. And so the real question here is that can I try and redress myself, get myself off the Interpol list with the rest of my career in terms of trying to do better with female-focused research? And so that's one of the reasons that we had FARC. And yes, I am the mother FARCer. So what led to our female athlete research camp? Well, we wanted to do better with female research, but we also recognised that having a 5-week camp is a really great opportunity because everyone's there over the length of a cycle. It's all different for every person, but if you had people living with you and you were tracking, you could find out when they reached the certain stages and then you could pull them out and do some testing and be able to see the effect of the menstrual cycle on various things. And we also had an amazing opportunity to collaborate with other people who were also interested, the AIS Female Performance and Health Initiative and the WUSI Human Performance Alliance in the US, and that led to FARC. It was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life and one of the things that has helped me with my own cultural journey because we gave the first of these opportunities. We put a tender out to team sports and we asked asked sports to nominate. And when we got a request in from the NRL to sponsor their Indigenous program for a research camp, it was just wonderful. It was an absolute incredible opportunity to spend 5 weeks with some wonderful people. And Jess Skinner, who's the high performance manager and coach, is the most wonderful person I think I've met in sport, incredibly generous. The whole outcomes in terms of the science have been wonderful. We're writing up a whole lot of things now and you can see it's very productive. You heard Shona talking about her contribution. But the serendipitous outcomes were really important to me. I've, for the first time, really got to spend time and understand the perspective of our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And the title of Auntie Louise, which I now have, means more to me than Professor. We really were able to help a lot of athletes who come from disadvantaged backgrounds and who have very little sport support. And we invited in talent scouts and a whole lot of teams to the camp, and many of the athletes who were part of it have gone on to get professional contracts or are able to play for Australia at international matches. So it's had a real life-changing effect for a lot of people, including me. One of the things we should be thinking about like this is how can some of the things that we do impact the whole community in a better way? It's great to work with athletes, but people say to me, isn't it a bit frivolous? Is that what you're going to use your brain for? Is that going to be your legacy, just making those people who already get paid enough money go higher, faster, stronger? And that's why I have to remember the trickle-down effect. And if I knew anything about cars or had any interest in them, I would be able to show you how all the money that's spent in F1 racing comes eventually into your family car. But you'll just have to trust me on that because I don't understand all the things that make cars work. But we've had some experiences in our life where we have tried to bring it back to the community. This is Jose Arita, who did a PhD with John and myself, and he came up and did 2 of his studies at the AIS. One on how much extra protein do you need to get the maximum protein response to resistance exercise when you're in energy deficit, when you're trying to lose weight. And also, what's the best way of spreading protein over the day to get the maximum effect from your resistance training. Now, this was sponsored by an ARC linkage grant, and the theme of the grant was sarc obesity in the community. How do we stop people who get to 50 and need to lose weight from becoming sarcopenic and bringing on another problem? And once we developed the strategies, it went on to become part of Keelan Murphy's PhD, where she took it with Stu Phillips into the community of older men to see whether these strategies could be effective in helping them to both maintain their muscle mass or even gain it when they're trying to lose weight later in life. So there's ways in which we could use our interest to be able to benefit the community. Number 9, really getting to the end here. How can we also take all our research knowledge and put it into practice? Now, ChatGPT said I had to do a case study, so here it is. So we have an unknown 19-year-old college swimmer. He does 10 sessions a week at college in his Div 1 school. He's never consumed a sports drink or any carbohydrate during his training sessions. He's got a history of immunosuppression, he gets sick a lot, and he doesn't do well at the end of the training sessions, he gets tired. So a nutritional assessment would say that he should drink a sports drink during his training sessions. So these are the ways that I've tried to get him to do it. I explained the benefits from it, for the muscle, for the brain, for his immune system, and I bought him a sports drink in a bottle. I tried to bribe him when he was younger by saying I'd increase his pocket money. I actually filled the bottle and put it by the door when he was going out so he wouldn't forget it, and I nagged him. None of those were effective. So then I got serious. I brought in the big dogs. I got Greg to tell him it was a good idea. I helped him with his HSC assignment where he had to review the literature on fuelling performance, thinking objectively he would understand it. I agreed to do a lecture for his student-athlete program at school and then got up and told everybody that he didn't drink a sports drink during training sessions despite the best of my abilities, thinking that might shame him into doing it. And more recently, I just sent 5 kilos of gummy bears over to his squad thinking, well, if he doesn't like sports drink, maybe he'll eat lollies, and if he had lots of them, he could be a hero of the squad, and then that would happen. Not so far. And then the beyond human. I got a chance to work with his favourite athlete in the world, and I worked with this athlete who didn't also drink a sports drink during his sport, and he didn't drink it because he didn't like it, and I got Jack, the participant, to help me develop a bespoke sports drink for his favourite athlete. And we went through the chemistry of millimoles of sodium and carbohydrate, whatever, in the special drink flavours that the athlete liked. He drinks Shirley Temples when he's out at a bar, and so we made a Shirley Temple sports drink. And I got Jack to meet the athlete, to make a video for him of what went into this sports drink, thinking, surely if his favourite athlete in the world listens to me, Jack will think that's worthy of listening. And surely the fun element of it will just switch it on in his brain. Nope. So I think we really got to do something more of understanding how we make people change behaviour. And I know all these models and they make it look so simple, but it's really complicated. I've busted my ass and I still can't do it. So we've got to do better. All right, we'll finish up with the thing that I think Ben and Greg said, and I liked the fact that they brought it up, so I've included it here. What's the problem that we've got at the moment with our credibility? Now, we might think that we're scientists and everything's evidence-based, but if you go back to a number of different sort of adventures or activities I've had in my life, we've really been questioned. At the Olympic Games in 2012, the day before the opening ceremony, the British Medical Journal and Panorama BBC program did an expose on sports science, and they concluded it was a waste of time. In particular, sports nutrition. How about this as a headline? 40 years of sports performance research and little insights gained. And they accused us of all these crimes, that what we do is just a total furphy. And that's not just the only thing. I get this all over the place, that what we do is not credible. And part of the problem, and Greg talked about it and Ben talked about it, was that we signed up to be credible sports scientists, and you can't look at everything in a lab. You cannot do every experiment to get exact evidence, but you can take good science and extrapolate it in ways that still means that there's evidence behind it. But what we're living in is this scienciness, as Greg and Ben told us yesterday. And I have to say that I did steal the idea from Stephen Colbert, who came up with truthiness, and I've just stolen it. And so this article, I'll quickly go through where I think the problems are. It's the fact that we're just so busy. We're just never getting time to think and contemplate or whatever. Life's just a rat race. And we're living in a time where people think of diets as religions or wars, and you have to pick a side. It's crazy. We've got celebrities as the experts. Here's me, we saw my Twitter account, I've got 16,000 followers. But Kim Kardashian has got 3 million. And she's not even the most popular in her family. So that's what we're up against, people giving advice with so much more reach than we have. And then we've got some scientists becoming celebrities so that their voices are the loudest, and they usually have the worst things to say. There's actually now a Kardashian index, and sports scientists or any scientist can be judged by their Twitter followers in proportion to their outputs in research. And you've got lots of people who've got a high Kardashian index where they've got plenty to say, but not much to back up what they're saying. We've got this incredible situation where at peak knowledge of the world, we now know so many things, and yet we've got people who just think about it in completely black and white manner and just do not look at the facts. And there's this old idea of shoutiness. This is another one of my favourite cartoons. I'm very sorry, Jeannie, your answer was correct, but Kevin shouted his incorrect answer over yours, so he gets the points. And that's really what we're listening, that's the problem. And we have real problems with science not being trusted. The problem now is getting people to review things critically. There's just so much stuff out there, And I look at stuff that I've bypassed that I couldn't accept to do review, and then I see it published and it's terrible, and I think, oh gosh, but you just can't do everything yourself. We've got the problem with these predatory journals putting stuff out there that isn't reviewed well and sometimes isn't reviewed at all, that are just completely diluting down good work. And then we've got this problem with the distrust of the science. So I want to leave you with some positive things of how to engage to be better at sports nutrition. And the first thing is you've got to remember it's a science. Even if you have to extrapolate, don't sell your soul just because an athlete will like you better by saying, yeah, that's great, do it. Remember, things change and evolve. It's not black and white. So be prepared to change your mind as well. You might hate social media, but that's what people are listening to. So if you can't do it yourself, then retweet someone else who does it better and make yourself part of the solution. But if you are in that space, don't be combative. Don't treat, sports science as something where we're being mean and nasty to each other. I don't like that at all. Be engaging with the way that you do things. Even if it's not social media, there's so many ways to educate, and we can do a much better job of that. And finally, never read the comments, because some people didn't have a nice mother that told them to be well-mannered. Tucker Goodrich, not looking at you. You'll just never get that time back. And then remember, you can't do every journal review that got sent to you. You can only do what you can in a day, and it'll still be there tomorrow. So just be realistic with what you can do and stay balanced. So I'll finish with what is the future of sports nutrition, and I really didn't need a crystal ball to tell me, because it's you. It's SDA. It's all you people in the room, the people that take the baton from us older people and move on with the world. And I'd really love to say thanks to everybody that listened here today and all the people I've met with over the last couple of days. I'd like to also acknowledge how wonderful the NIN is, that, we thought that when AIS Sports Nutrition dissolved, that would be the end, but let's thank NIN for the great work you're doing, and particularly Gary Slater, who's one of the most wonderful human beings alive. It's just so positive to see our future. I did get fun made of me for this picture, and I would like to say, yes, I had a lot of fun in my life, and I've done some great things. It is a great career to be a sports dietitian, and when people say, oh, you must be sick of getting all those awards, I say, no, I really value every piece of positive feedback that we can give each other, and I thank the people that spend the time doing the nominations and handing out. And I again say, this is a team award. It's not for me, it's for us to celebrate what we do. And I'd really just like to give you the final bit of that story that you didn't hear, because I've been able to do a lot of things in my life, but the first step is hard. And that's Trevor Barker. And he was the captain of the Australian rules football team that I followed. He is was the David Beckham of AFL football, playing for a dud team. When I was 20 years old and just doing my dietetics, I wrote to Trevor Barker, handwritten, and said, Trevor Barker, the Saints have only won one premiership in now 150 years, and the difference is sports nutrition, and I'd like to help. I later on found, when I was working at the club, he would have got probably 500 letters a week, mostly from girls, but he read my letter and he gave it to the team doctor, and the rest is history. That was that first step. And so I would like to leave all you young people that think, God, how do I get moving and how do I find a career path that's going to be satisfying? It never makes sense until you get to this point and you can look back. It's all random as you're going, but in hindsight, you'll recognise that everything you did was important and it led you to where you get in the end. But a lot of it is due to the kindness and the serendipity from other people. So be kind to each other and put yourself in situations where serendipity could happen. and that will be your future. Thank you very much. Now, Greg said to me, I have one very, very, very special thing to do, and that's to give out this very special book. And he said to me, did people come up and talk to you and introduce yourself, you young people? Did they take advantage of the invitation that Greg and Ben gave them? And I said, yes, they did. I've spoken to so many people, met some great people. He said, do you remember any of their names? And I always do. Everybody, I will turn over and have a look at your name tag, because that's how I remember things, to see it and trying to take it. But because I am old, I only remember the last couple, and I'm so sorry for all those people that came yesterday, but the person who's standing out in my mind at the moment is Isabel, or Bella, as she introduced herself to me. And is she still here? Yes, there she is. So thank you for having the courage to walk up and introduce yourself. And I'm sorry to all the other people that went before you. I wish my brain could remember things.
We've got time for some questions? Yeah? Fiona, do you want to do some questions? So we've got time for a couple of questions, if anyone can summarise that into one question or two questions. Anyone? Just in awe? Yeah. Just down at one.
Thanks, Louise. That was just so inspiring to hear about your career. You've done so many things across the, I don't want to say how many years, but, you know, over the course of your career. And now, at this stage, when you look back and reflect on that, do you have a top, I guess, thing that's happened in your life? Like, what would be, when you look back and you think, and I suppose, you know, it's hard to reflect on so much, but is there one thing that really stands out to you in terms of your career?
That's a really great question, and I was asked it recently, and I wrote down that the best thing in my career hasn't happened yet. It's the Saints winning the premiership. And it being attributed back to my two stints with them, 1980 to 82 and 2006 to 2008. And that was because I couldn't think of any one thing. I mean, the thing that I think of most is just the things I've done collegially with you all. And I'm not joking about AIS Sports Nutrition. I'm sure you've had enough of me, you know, just saying how wonderful it was. It was Camelot. And it was what allowed me to do so many wonderful things. I think the mentoring of other people, you don't recognise just how much you get out of it yourself. It's a really selfish thing because it pushes you higher. You're not dragging somebody else up, they're pushing you. And so it's such a wonderful opportunity to be able to have young people, you know, keeping you fresh and on your toes and improving all the time. And look, as much as I'm still grief-stricken about the end of the AIS, but now it's made me have more opportunities with people I didn't interact before. And so, you know, the interactions I'm having now with VIS and with QAS and so many other people of you that I wouldn't have had because, you know, we were in our little team already. Like, in some ways it's sad, but it's also wonderful. And, you know, there's just so many different things that I can now do. And I'm still looking forward to doing a lot more of it. And, you know, I'll probably go to my grave still thinking about something that we didn't do. But look, everything's a highlight. It just keeps getting better and better and better. But as I said, you don't sometimes understand it until you're looking back at just how wonderful those opportunities that you had were. And, you know, sometimes, like when I heard Ben and Greg tell some of those stories, and I think back to, like, that was just a magic time, but some of the magic events, you know, that was just the best. Everything was the best because it was always just good fun. I don't think I've ever had a day where I didn't think that I was the luckiest person in the world and that it was going to be a great day because I was going to meet other people who were similarly inclined and we'd do something that was just wonderful. And the serendipity, that's my favourite word, 2 words. Mummy and serendipity, my 2 favourite words. And isn't it just wonderful when you put people that are wonderful together and just stuff happens? That's just the beauty of it, isn't it? So, probably not a good answer, but that's all I could say.
We've got time for one more. Anyone? Down the back. Amy on 25.
Sorry, Louise, instead of bugging Greg like I do all the time, I'm going to bug you instead. I guess my question is just, I guess, around those of us who want to follow in your footsteps. How did you manage to balance research and practice and be, I guess, successful in your interactions with athletes in both research and practice and leave such a legacy in both of those areas?
That's a great question. I think I've always been a practitioner, and the research was just a means to be sure that the practice that we were doing was as good as it could be. And then more recently I've realised that the act of doing the research, as we've seen with the research camps, changes your relationship with the athlete and has those other outcomes that are terrific. So research has been sort of a means to an end rather than the end in itself. I don't count the publication. I know I have to do it because I'm in academia, but it was a real shock when I had to start looking at those metrics in a different way. So I think loving the practice is the most important thing and putting the research into the perspective that it is. But in terms of balance, here's where I need to say that my husband calls me N+1. And that means that whatever resources we've got, whether it's time or money or brain power or everything, I want to do one more. And so he's frustrated with just the amount of stuff that I take on, and I've told him that I'm going to try and be an N plus 0.5. So I'm not sure how much balance I've achieved, but I've had a lot of fun doing it. So, and I love John and I love Jack, and they're so wonderful to allow me to have had the career that I've had. But if I could get him to drink sports drink, I would be so happy.
Awesome. Thanks so much. It's really been such an inspirational way to end. There's a little thank you gift for you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Fiona.